I'm going to show you how to digitally paint based on a line drawing you've already done. Create a brand new layer and put it underneath your line layer. Let's keep things clear by labeling our layers. This layer is going to be local color, which is the actual color of the object, no shading or anything, just blank. And then the layer with all our lines on it is, well, we'll call that our ink layer. You can call it your line layer if you want. Now I'm back on the local color layer, and I want to make brown, or I want to get brown, which basically means I go to orange and select a darkish orange. And then darkish orange equals brown. Wait a minute, it's kind of hard for me to see what I'm coloring. So let me do this. Let me go to my ink layer. I'm going to turn the opacity down. I click over here on the magic wand and click opacity. Then I slide my finger to the left and it makes the opacity go down. Now if I go back to my local color layer, make sure you apply your local color on the layer that says local color. Now I can actually see what I'm doing. You'll hear some sink action in the background. That's my son Elliot washing his hands. Say hi, Elliot. Say it louder. They're gonna think I'm just crazy. There we go. As we're working, I will play Patrick Watson's Love Songs for Robots. Enjoy.
Something's like it leaves from your eyes while this tears by surprise. Stop wasting your words from around as you're running out of thoughts as your bird's burning out. Watch as it flows through your hands and
After I finish blocking in all my color, I'm going to create a new layer for just general shading. And I'll call it Shading 1. Which does suggest there'll be a second shading level or layer later. Anyways, to make shading easier, I'm going to select just the local color area. So, hey, nice. So I'm going to go to local color and then take my selection tool and tap the colored area with automatic, down there at the bottom. Make sure automatic is selected at the bottom. Then tap the area. Go back to shading 1. Once again, be on your shading 1 layer and take a bluish black color. Find the right opacity and the right brush size for you.
Would you like to try, Elliot?
And
Would you
hold on a second, I'm recording this. So all the students are going to hear you asking Elliot if he wants to try making the weird mask out of the gel. Which is fine. I'm sure they'll think it's delightful, maybe. I should say a duck joke. Anyways, but listen, the important thing is that you're actually looking at the subject so you can see which areas are darker, and you would just kind of block those in with this transparent bluish blackish shading. And you're not going to get it like perfect the first time, but just get just the general areas. Because when we do our second layer of shading, that's where you get those like precise tight areas. We're still not there. We're still just kind of generally just shading the areas that look darker. Some areas that are extra dark you go over twice, and areas that are only a little dark you go over once. Now it looks a little sloppy, but I'm going to fix that in just a second.
Dad, can I run these?
Yeah, that's fine. Go for it. So now I'm going to fix how sloppy it is by grabbing my smudge tool. You see how that little blue hand there at the top? That's what I just touched. And now I get just the right size and the right opacity. And if you adjust the opacity like that, that determines kind of how hard you're pressing with your blending stump. If you were to imagine that your smudge tool is like a blending stump. And then the size will determine the size. So there we go. I'm just kind of blending it. And to get the blending tool, the smudge tool, to work really well, you just got to keep experimenting with the size of the brush and the hardness of or the size of the brush and the opacity of your smudge brush. Until you get it just right. Oh, by the way, I've been using hard airbrush like this whole time. On everything I've done, it's been hard airbrush. Now I'm going to create a highlights layer, and I'm going to call it Highlight 1. And on this brand new highlight layer, I'm going to select a warm, really light color. So for our shadows, I used a dark, cool color, like bluish black. And now I'm going to use, for highlights, a warm, light color. And then make my brush bigger and not very opaque, and just kind of block in areas that are lighter. Areas that are really light, I go over multiple times. Areas that are a little light, I'll just go over once. And this whole time, I've still got that selection tool selected just on the local color layer, so I don't need to worry about going outside the edges. It makes it so much easier. And I'm just blocking it in, just adding general highlight areas. And then I go to my smudge tool. See that? The little hand, like I'm using the smudge tool, which, and then kind of smoothing it out. Okay, up next, I'm going to go back to my layers, and I'm going to add shading number 2. And on this layer, once again, we're going to use kind of a bluish black color here. And on shading number 2, I'm going to add precise, tight little shading. These are areas that I'm not going to blend later. I'm not going to use the smudge tool on these later. I want these to be relatively tight, and they'll just be small little crevices or any other areas that you see that are just particularly dark. And this is what really kind of makes things have a little more definition. And I look over at my, well, that looks good. I look over at the head and I see that it needs to be a little darker there. But wait a minute, this is going to be shading 2, and that feels like it needs to be blended out. So I'm not going to do it there. Instead, I'm going to go to shading 1, and that's where I'm going to put this kind of bigger brush, larger area, things that I would want to kind of blend out a little bit. So try to keep larger shading bits or larger shading areas on shading 1, and then more precise, smaller, darker areas on shading 2. Okay, so now I'm going to add highlight 2, which just like shading 2 is like precise, really dark shaded areas that are kind of small. Highlights 2 are going to be really bright areas that, and again, use a warm color, warm white color, and you're going to right along the edges. Hey guys, go right along the edges with this really bright color. And when you put highlight 2 next to shading 2, things really pop and have contrast, which is really cool. Now, if you have something that's like a glossy, shiny surface, then you can leave these pretty much as is. So if this was like a hard plastic or something like that, or a marble, then you could just leave them as is. But since this is wood, it's just kind of a smooth surface, we are going to do something in just a minute to kind of make it look less glossy. First though, let me look for any areas that are directly facing the light. So including those corners and maybe here at the top of the head that's kind of really close to light and facing it. I'm going to add these kind of bright highlights. And then to make it look less glossy, I can go up to here under the magic wand. Again, that's under the magic wand, Gaussian blur. And this just kind of just blurs the whole thing. So there we go. So now it looks more like what a wooden shape would look like. Not super glossy, but a little glossy. Oh, and once you take off that ink layer, or take off the layer of the lines, then it looks really nice. And to review, it's just a flat color underneath the lines, and then you add your shading, and then highlights, and then another round of darker shading, another round of dark or brighter highlights, and there you go!